Back in 1995, a company called Beyond Games developed Ultra Vortek for the Atari Jaguar platform. And it was only released on the Atari Jaguar platform. And for good reason. Let's check it out. The old Atari Jaguar boot screen. In case you were wondering what it looked like, here it is. Alright, I think it's proper to start with a little background on this one. Back in 1995, there was one type of game that was dominating arcades, and that was Mortal Kombat. It was a wildly successful game. It was a great game. Even if you weren't that into fighting games, you probably played a couple rounds of Mortal Kombat, or Mortal Kombat 2, or Mortal Kombat 3. And with good reason. I mean, they were just well-designed games. But on the downside, a lot of companies tried to cash in on the success of Mortal Kombat and try to come up with what formula made Mortal Kombat successful. So they thought that if you had a fighting game that was ultra-violent, had blood and gore and finishing moves, it automatically equaled dollar signs. And that's just not true. So let me get right into the nitty-gritty of Ultra Vortek. This game is obviously a Mortal Kombat clone. Not a particularly good one either. There aren't a whole lot of characters to choose from. And the characters that you can choose from, although they may look unique, they're basically kind of the same. They all have extremely similar moves. And, you know, basically that's about all there is to the game. You know, it's a 2D fighting game. The only thing you really got is uniqueness in moves to, you know, make the game stand apart between, you know, character to character to make the game more challenging to play an opponent against. And this game just doesn't have it. And I think there's two things at fault for the reason why this game isn't that good. Part of it is obviously the game developer's fault. I mean, they just didn't put a whole lot of thought into the game as far as unique moves are concerned. And the other part of the equation here is the Atari Jaguar itself. The Jaguar controller, although it's a monstrosity, only really has 3 buttons and a D-pad. There is a 12-button keypad attached to the controller. And some games did utilize the keypad, but this game does not. So essentially, you're playing a complex 2D fighting game with one extra button than the Nintendo NES has on a controller. It just doesn't work that well. To me, doing something like that is akin to when Double Dragon was ported to the Atari 2600. Aside the obvious fact that, you know, the Atari 2600 just couldn't handle a game with complex graphics like Double Dragon. The controller only had one button, and there was essentially punch and kick in Double Dragon, and you needed to kind of use both. So that just made the game a nightmare to play. And I kind of agree that this is on par with that, with only 3 buttons plus a D-pad. It just isn't well suited to a 2D fighter. Now, moving beyond the obvious design and conceptual flaws of putting a game like this on the Atari Jaguar, let's talk about player control, above and beyond the limitations of the joystick. There are some flaws in that as well. If you're standing upright and pushing a punch or kick button or whatever action button you choose, and then you decide while you're pushing it a couple times that you want to duck, it doesn't work. You have to push down first and then hit the button, or else you're locked in an upright standing position. And that just really is tough to play that way. Now, the other problem I had with this game, with player control, was that the controls were pretty slow to respond. So when you're doing things like trying to put together combinations of joystick and button moves to make one super move, like if you wanted to do like a quarter circle towards and one of the punch buttons, you have to do them at an extremely slow rate, or else it just doesn't register. So it feels very unnatural. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about graphics and sound. Now the graphics in this game are pretty good. Quite on par with you know, comparable games for the Jaguar. Not subpar by any means for the system. But they were a little dark for my taste. I like a little more bright, vibrant colors in games, personally. The sound I thought was pretty poor. There was a lot of compression used on the music and voice dialogue, and so much so that it was irritating. Everything sounded dim and like of poor quality, and that was just because they put so much compression on to fit it into their memory limitations on the cart. I would have liked to see less of the voice work and more concentration on better sounding music. I could do without the guy, you know, saying victorious. So overall, I think this game is a pretty feeble attempt to cash in on the success of Mortal Kombat. The graphics are alright. Sound is pretty crappy. Not a big fan of the sound at all in this game. Controls are ultra crappy. And the replayability is just not there. I've only played the one-player version of this game because I only have one controller for my Atari Jaguar. But I imagine it's a little bit more fun when you're playing a friend in the two-player mode. Now, if you're unfortunate enough to actually own an Atari Jaguar and do not own this game, actually that's a pretty fortunate thing if you own a Jaguar and don't own this game. But if you feel the need to pick up this game, don't bother. Don't go out of your way. This game isn't exactly common, so if you want to pick it up, you might have to really like look around, and you might spend a couple bucks because Atari Jaguar games in general aren't cheap. There aren't a whole lot of them out there. It wasn't a very well-selling system, and basically it was Atari's last stand before going bye-bye. At least as far as the home consoles are concerned. They may have still held on there for arcade stuff. And there you have it. Ultra Vortek for the Atari Jaguar. Or as I like to call it, shitty Mortal Kombat clone. I'm Dommie from Classic Games Revisited. Until next time.